Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can maintain the positive streak of keeping the event on time. My name is Britt Raybould. I am a state representative from Idaho. I have a district that is in eastern Idaho in the Snake River Plain. It is a pleasure to be here with you. So today's panel is one that follows a track that goes with prior Pennoir events where we try to go into a particular area and identify existing water issues that are happening in communities that have cross boundaries, that have the potential to help us learn from each other and to identify the potential partnerships that have not only worked in the past, but as models for what we can look to in the future. And that is the focus of this particular panel today. And we're looking on the Canadian side of the border with regards to the St. Mary Milk River, Elk River, and the Souris River basins. So the breakdown for this discussion today, just so you kind of have a track of how we're doing, is there will be two initial presentations. We will invite some additional speakers to join us on the stage at that point, and then there will be a legislative response at the end. Of course, for those of you who have been here long enough, you know that there is the ability for you to submit your questions through the Whova app, so please do so. We are always happy to take those audience questions. And then finally, our presenters have included some documents, I believe maps and some other detailed information to help orient you to the locations and questions that will be discussed today to help give you a sense of place and context for where this discussion goes. Now, with that said, I would like to introduce our first presenter, Commissioner Lance Yohe from the International Joint Commission. Commissioner, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Britt. What I want to do is tell you a little bit about the International Joint Commission, some of the stuff we're working on. So the two countries, US and Canada, back in the early 1900s, decided that they were seeing some conflict on water issues in different places. They thought, okay, maybe we need to set up some way to deal with it. And actually, Britain did the first treaty with US on behalf of Canada, then Canada picked it up later. But they agreed that they would do that by setting up in a commission, independent of government, but still working for government. And they said, let's put 3 commissioners from each country on there. And they do that. And usually the commissioners last about 4 years, depending on how things evolve. On the Canadian side, they're appointed for 4-year terms. On the U.S. side, they're appointed by the president at the president's will. So right now on the U.S. side, we have Jerry Acker from Detroit, myself from North Dakota, and Robert from New York, and then Pierre Barry from Quebec, Marilyn Farr from Manitoba, and Susan Chibolo from Ontario. This is the area we work on, and it's over 5,000 miles from one end to the other of the shared boundary we have with Canada. And we do stuff in these areas as governments ask us to under the treaty. So this is kind of like going the wrong way or something. There we go. So what we do in the treaty is we set conditions for projects that obstruct, divert boundary waters. So you can imagine in the first century, as we got started, important things like irrigation, water supply, hydropower, navigation were kind of driving the development of both countries. And then in the mid part of that century, water quality became more important. And now we look at the whole watershed, trying to look at how things fit together. And then we investigate in this area anything the governments refer to us to work on, and then we do an independent study, and we report back to them. So I'm going to talk about 3 boards, give you an example of some of the work we do and how it impacts economics and the things that you're interested in. So in the Souris board, it's kind of in the middle. It's in this area here, in Saskatchewan, North Dakota, and Manitoba. And what we deal with in this area is how water quality. We try to understand water quality as it crosses one jurisdiction or the other. We try to regulate water for water supply and for flood control. So in Saskatchewan, there's 3 major dams, Grant Divine, Rafferty, and Estevan, there's a dam there. Two of the dams, Grant Devine and Rafferty, were jointly funded by the U.S. and Saskatchewan. And so there's water supply storage in those dams. There's also flood control in those dams. And flooding happens when the Souris River comes down into North Dakota. It really can get bad around the Minot area. In 2011, there was a huge flood there that they're still trying to recover from. And then in the U.S. side, there's reservoirs like Darling, a couple Fish and Wildlife reserves. And one of the things we do is we try to manage and monitor the water that crosses from one jurisdiction into the other, so you have continual flows so that you don't have habitat degradation. So this one is a board where we work on public, indigenous, aquatic ecosystem health, adaptive management, and then we have the Natural Flows and Apportionment Committee on our board where we make sure both sides get what they're supposed to and everybody's playing fair. Because of the reservoirs that are there that are managed by agencies, we have a unique setting going on in this region where we have the water management agencies, which are federal and provincial and state agencies that are responsible for regulating the flows of the reservoirs. But we have a role with them in cooperation for maintaining the flows coming out of them in ways that don't cause problems, that help with flooding, maintain flows in the stream, and forecast floods. The next one over I want to talk about is St. Mary's Milk, and there's a lot of folks here. We're going to talk about that in the panel a bit. St. Mary's Milk is a board that was put in place in 1921, not very long after the treaty. And it's an irrigation district, and it's in this area of Alberta and Montana and Saskatchewan. And what you have over on the left is water coming off the glaciers in Montana Glacier National Park, flowing north in the St. Mary's River. And then you have a diversion channel that the U.S. has built that takes some of the water from a lake, Sherburne Lake, as it comes off the St. Mary, and it takes it and diverts it over to the Milk. Then it goes up into Alberta on the Milk River, and it comes back into Montana, and there's some more reservoirs there, Fresno Reservoir. So what we're doing is trying to capture water coming off a glacier, water coming off a prairie river with runoff and whatever's there from snow and rain, and distributing that in a way that people can irrigate. So irrigation up in Alberta on the St. Mary's is some of the richest irrigation land in Canada. Over on the Milk River in Alberta, it's good irrigation land as well, but it gets hit most by the fluctuation in the flows. And then down in Montana, there's some good irrigation in that area as well. So what we're finding in this area is challenges with climate variation. We're getting earlier runoff, means the runoffs have to be, the reservoirs have to be filled up at a different time. And sometimes that doesn't get us through the whole season. So we decided that a few years ago, we would take a look at that whole system, what we've had in place since 1921, and see if we can update it. So we set up a study board, and the study board we brought in are people who don't have a stake in the game in that area, but who have knowledge, and they're experts. And so we have a lady from Wyoming, for example, who has worked in water her whole life, who's on the study board. But we also know that you can't do it without governments. So we have a government liaison, and we have an independent reviewer at the very end that will look at what we've produced before it goes to governments and give us suggestions. And then we have technical teams on this study board that are working on the details. They're working on models, looking at, okay, if we change this on the administrative rules, what happens if we model that? And then they've been doing that, and they're trying to look at everything from impacts on when the water is available, socioeconomic impacts that relate to impacting the irrigators, aquatic ecosystem, and they're also looking at infrastructure options. And then we have advisory groups again, the Indigenous and Public Advisory Group. This project has been going on for a number of years now. It's wrapping up the end of September this year. We'll be having public meetings in August, going out to the public and saying, here's what the study committee is recommending. How does that sound? And then they'll give it to the IJC. We'll do whatever we need to do to that to make it fit for governments to get. Then we'll send it to Global Affairs in Canada and the Department of State in the US. And then they'll decide what implementation they want to do in relation to that. But right now, the study is showing that we could change administrative procedures a little bit and it would balance the water, so everybody gets their fair share the way they're supposed to, according to the agreement. And there's been some challenges with that in the past. We're trying to correct those. It also starts to include indigenous perspectives, and it's definitely looking at climate variability and what we're experiencing now. And then there will be some recommendations as well for infrastructure options. On the canal, for example, on the infrastructure options, it's gradually been filling in with sediment. So it carries 150 CFS less than it did in original. That's a big deal, but it's a huge expense to fix. So there's also options of other places to store water along the system that will maybe help. But again, those are added costs. So we'll see what comes out of it, what the public feedback we get, what the governments and irrigators think about it. And hopefully we'll get a path forward that takes us another 100 years where we're working and sharing this water across the boundary. It's a huge economic impact in this area, just like on the Sturgess, the impact for water supply and the impact for flood reduction damages, the impact on water quality as it affects all the things all the way down to Winnipeg, where it empties into the city of Winnipeg and then goes into Lake Winnipeg. And then Manitoba, or Saskatchewan, sorry, right now is looking at some of the reservoirs as they switch from coal. Can they move to small modular reactors and do nuclear? So we're looking at that over in the source here. We're continuing to look at the irrigation benefits. The last study I want to talk about is over on the Kootenai system. And this is related to mining, which is a big economic driver for everybody up in this part of the world. And what we're found is we have a board up here working over on the left side on that body of water where we've been regulating Kootenai Lake, and we have flows outcoming from there that we've been doing, but we haven't done much on the right side. But in the right side, there's a huge coal mine up on the Elk River that empties in to the Kootenai. And when they mine the coal, they take the soil off, get to the coal, and then all that underlying rock gets exposed to rain. And when the rain comes, chemicals that are in the ground accumulate, and selenium's been doing that in that area to the level where it's unhealthy for wildlife, it's unhealthy for the ecosystem, it's unhealthy for people. So what the government's finally decided to do was ask the IJC to study that. Normally, we just get a study board like it's on one side of this diagram. But this time, because of the impact on the Ktunaxa tribes in both, there's six tribes with that ancestry in those two countries right in that area, they decided to see if we could not only study the issue, come up with recommendations about it, and allow mining to continue, but see if we could address some of the impacts, but also to have the governance bodies working on this, which includes 6 from Canada, from the provinces and the federal government, 6 from the Ktunaxa tribes, and 6 from the U.S. between the states and federal government. The idea of all that is once we find solutions that we think we can work on, we need to have policies and funding to move them forward. And having governments at that scale tied into that, we think the recommendations have a better chance of moving forward at the end. So just quickly, we set up a study board, again, independent people from outside the area. We have on one side the orange, the Indigenous Council, the Council of the Ktunaxa. And then on the gray on the other side, we have industry, public, and governments. And then underneath the study management board, we have project management. And then we have twigs, technical working groups. We have technical working groups looking at water quality, ecosystem health, human health, and mitigation. And then they do detailed work on that, bring it up to the study board. The study board does whatever analysis they need to do of that. And from that will come a final report that will come to IJC. The governance body will look at it and then we'll pass it on to governments. So this is just a picture of the study board. They're from all over the country, both countries. One of them's from North Carolina. So that's all I have. We can talk more about it when we get to the panel, and Len Ring is gonna take over and go from here. The green button.
Green one?
Yep.
I'm a native Albertan. I was born in Calgary, grew up, went to the University of Calgary, University of Saskatchewan, where I got a degree in agricultural engineering. And I followed that up with a master's in agricultural engineering at Colorado State. For a bit over 30 years, I've been the irrigation advisor to the Blood Tribe Agricultural Project. And so I was happy when Levi asked if I could make this presentation. As you can imagine, being the manager of a large irrigation project in southern Alberta in mid-July, Levi's pretty busy and couldn't be here today. The Blood Tribe has, and other native nations in southern Alberta have a long history of cooperating, going even back to when our Northwest Mounted Police came to Alberta in 1874. This picture was painted by a famous Montana painter, Charlie Russell, who spent some time in southern Alberta. If we look at agreements, I guess the first agreement we could talk about is Treaty 7. Treaty 7 was signed by 5 First Nations and the Government of Canada. 3 of those are part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, of which the Blood Tribe Kainai First Nation is. And the Blackfoot Confederacy is also the Blackfeet Nation in northern Montana is also part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Chief Red Crow signed Treaty 7 on behalf of the Kainai First Nation, and he saw the potential of agriculture in Canada's largest reserve. He was the first farmer and rancher on the reserve, and the leaders who followed also saw the potential. When the federal government looked at building St. Mary Dam, St. Mary Reservoir, and the canal from the Waterton River to the Belly River to the St. Mary River, Chief shot both sides and other leaders agreed to allow them to do that, but they also said, we want to be able that in the future, if we develop irrigation, we want to have water available. So part of the building of the St. Mary Reservoir in the early 1950s included an agreement that when the time comes, water would be made available to the Blood Tribe for their irrigation development. So why should we bother irrigating on the Blood Reserve? Well, in a dry year, in August, this is what the dryland crops look like. If you irrigate, this is what they look like. So it's pretty obvious that irrigation has potential. And after many years of lobbying, in 1989, there's an agreement between the federal government, the provincial government, and the Blood Tribe to develop the Blood Tribe Agricultural Project. And the reason I've got this picture up, that's Chief Roy Fox, who was instrumental in getting BTAP agreement signed. And the lady is Senator Joyce Fairburn. Now, what happened in 1993, we had a change of government at the federal level. The original agreement was signed by the conservative government, and now we had a liberal government. And for those of you familiar with Alberta, it's sometimes hard to find a liberal MP in Alberta. Senator Joyce Fairburn was a liberal senator, and the Senate is completely different in Canada than the United States. But she was instrumental in continuing the liaison, and the Liberal government also saw the potential of the Blood Tribe Agricultural Project, and it continued with no change. So what is the Blood Tribe Agricultural Project? Well, from 1991 to 1999, it was developed in phases, and by 1999, they had 95 center pivots irrigating just over 15,000 acres. The Blood Reserve is the largest reserve in Canada, almost 550 square miles. It's just southwest of Lethbridge, as you can see here, and it goes almost to the US border, not quite. The system that BTAP is part of takes water actually from the Waterton River over to the Belly River, from the Belly River over to St. Mary Reservoir, and from St. Mary Reservoir, water heads east, and you'll hear a lot more about that later in the presentation. That canal going east serves the McGrath, Raymond, and St. Mary River Irrigation District, almost 600,000 acres of irrigation. About 38% of the irrigation in all of Alberta's 11 irrigation districts. That canal also serves towns, villages, industry, and private irrigators. Now, BTAP takes its water just before it enters St. Mary Reservoir, goes north to Mauchline Ridge Reservoir. Technically, that reservoir isn't necessary for BTAP. They could just take water from the canal straight to the project. However, when the design was envisioned, and again showing how the Blood Tribe cooperates with its neighbors, they realized that, well, there might be times in July when all of the water coming from the Belly River needs to continue east. So by adding this small reservoir, if there's a 2-week or 3-week period that all of the water from the Belly River has to continue east, the BTAP project can operate without diverting any water out of that canal. The water distribution system is operated by a SCADA system, and 100% of the staff that operate and maintain that system are Blood Tribe members. The SCADA system is developed by a consulting firm in Lethbridge. Many other irrigation districts use similar systems, and that system is accessible via a laptop or your cell phone. There was an expansion in 2021. They added a few more pivots in the southwest corner, and now that brings the total to a little bit over 23,000 acres. Now, BTAP is not an irrigation district in Alberta, but it is larger than the 4 smallest irrigation districts in Alberta. And how do you run that many pivots? Well, they use a software package that the pivot manufacturer has, and this is common to most pivot manufacturers. Most southern Alberta farmers with pivots have this type of a system. It shows what systems are running, what systems are not running. If there's a fault, it shows immediately. And again, this is accessible via laptop or your cell phone. And again, all of the operation and maintenance of all the on-farm irrigation system is done by 100% Blood Tribe members. Another example of how the Blood Tribe cooperates with the neighbors was in 2001. In Alberta, water licensing under the Water Act is a first-in-time, first-in-right priority. However, in 2001, initially from the irrigation districts, but pretty soon everyone in the southern tributaries of the Oldman River realized we're in trouble this year. We have a water supply problem. What can we do to, if we don't have to enforce FITFR, is there something else we can do? So they cooperated, and almost all the license holders agreed, let's all share the water equally. And in the end, as you can see here, there was about 200 licensees responsible for 300 individual projects, or 98% of the water licensed in the southern tributaries agreed to share. The Blood Tribe was one of the groups that said, we'll share too. And it got so much recognition, the U.S. Irrigation Association in 2003 presented the group with their National Water and Energy Conservation Award. And it was really interesting when the award was presented in San Diego, the reaction we got from many other jurisdictions as, gee, how did you do that? So the Blood Tribe has a long history of cooperation, but I guess I would be remiss if I left the impression that everything the federal and provincial government do and the Kainai First Nation agree on everything. There are issues, like many First Nations, that they don't agree, but I think by working together and coming to consensus, good things like BTAP can happen.
Thank you to Lance and Len for getting us kicked off. I would now like to invite our other presenters to join us on stage, Margo and Kim and David, if you would come up here with us. We're now going to go into a directed Q&A, and we're going to try to look through some of the practical implications of what this entails for those who are on the ground having to deal with this from day-to-day management operations. If you really want to, you can. I thought you might be more comfortable down there until the end. So let's go ahead and get started with some brief introductions. Margo, would you please start?
Thanks. So Margo Jarvis Redelback. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Irrigation Districts Association. That association represents Alberta's 11 irrigation districts on matters of mutual interest. Our work really focuses on developing positive relationships with others within our watershed, and that includes governments, as well as administering collaborative water-based projects on behalf of the irrigation districts and educating all on irrigation's importance. And just to provide some context for those of you in the room who don't know much about irrigation in Alberta, 75% of all of the irrigation in Canada is practiced in Alberta, and over 80% of that occurs within the administrative boundaries of our 11 irrigation districts in southern Alberta. So you could say it really is the irrigation capital of Canada. Our districts do convey water from our surface source rivers, no groundwater, all surface sources, through 8,000 kilometers of district-owned linear infrastructure and 41 irrigation storage reservoirs to over 1.5 million irrigated agricultural land acres. So that land base only represents 4.4% of Alberta's cultivated land base. So it's quite small, but it does have huge economic impact. It produces about 1/3 of Alberta's primary agricultural product, 28% of Alberta's agri-food processing GDP, in addition to contributing $5.4 billion to provincial GDP annually, $3.2 billion in labor income, and supporting 50,000 full-time equivalent positions across the province. Our irrigation districts are key participants in basin water management in the South Saskatchewan River Basin. They hold senior priority water licenses under that FIT-FIR system that Len described, and they have collective water volume allocations of representing about 70% of the basin's total licensed water volume.
Kim.
Hi, it's Kim Sturgess, proud Calgarian, proud Albertan, proud Canadian. And I am the founder and up till recently the CEO of Water Smart Solutions. And that is now Hazen Canada, all things water. My interest here today is in collaborative water management. So I was quite intrigued to have a lot of discussion yesterday morning, the opening around collaboration. So my particular interest is in developing water management solutions with our partners, and we would be the recipient of Margo's participation in those over many years. and to produce solutions that are fact-based, science-based, and trusted by water managers that they can use to solve their problems, and particularly in issues of flood and drought. So I'm looking forward to having a discussion on the Saskatchewan River Roadmap project and what kinds of things we can do to better manage our precious resource here in Alberta that perhaps can be something useful for consideration in the other jurisdictions. Thank you.
David.
Morning, everyone. My name is David Westwood. I am the general manager of the St. Mary River Irrigation District, which is located in southern Alberta, one of the 11 that Margo referred to. We are Canada and North America's largest irrigation district based on irrigated volume of acreage. So we irrigate now over 520,000 acres between the corridor of Lethbridge, Alberta, to Medicine Hat, and over 50% of our water supply comes from the St. Mary River that originates on the U.S. side of the border. That obviously was talked about originally by Commissioner Yohe. And so we're very interested. We're a direct recipient of the International Joint Commission in that St. Mary Milk River Order of 1921. We also have water supply that originates on the Canadian side, the Waterton and Belly as well. And they all converge at St. Mary Reservoir and then make its way over to Milk River Ridge Reservoir. And then that's where we take over with our infrastructure. So we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in irrigation in southern Alberta and particularly in our district a little bit as we get through some of the questions today.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for all of you for being here today and participating. So to kick things off, as we have been told, this is not normal weather for Edmonton and Alberta this time of year. So it's clear that the conditions we think of as normal have shifted a bit. So Margo and David, this is a question for you. How are you viewing and pursuing collaboration with other partners under these extreme conditions that are proving less than predictable?
I think I'll go first. And I'm going to talk about drought extremes that we have been experienced. And, Len made reference to water sharing agreements that occurred in 2001 due to an extreme drought. The last time that we faced really water supply shortages or the impacts of extreme drought was in 2023. That year, we saw relatively good snowpack in our mountain reservoir, so to speak. But we ended up experiencing a heat dome that started at the end of April with very high temperatures and then a lack of precipitation during that growing season. And that heat really meant that the snowpack melted about 3.5 weeks earlier than normal. So there was a real inability to capture the flow in the rivers in our reservoirs while it was flowing by because those reservoirs were already pretty full. And then we saw increased demand happen just after that. So the reservoirs across the irrigated region really started being depleted into June. And as a result, a lot of the water users across the basin really responded to those conditions, irrigation districts in particular. They could have, under our Fit First system, demanded or requested to the regulator that they wish to take all of their diversion under their licenses because they do hold senior licenses. But our districts didn't do that. Instead, they worked with other license holders in their basins to ensure that they would reduce diversion. Some of the districts, and David can speak to that, reduced their mandatory on-farm allocation to their farmers mid-season, which had never ever happened before. And then going into the fall, our districts did such things as restrict fall irrigation to their farmers. And then some of them actually shut down their water diversion up to 2 weeks earlier. And that was all designed to try to maintain enough water in the reservoirs across the region so that there was water through the winter season for those who draw off of those reservoirs, including the municipalities, but also to ensure that there was some water in the spring in the reservoirs in the event that the snowpack failed to be produced in the mountains. So then going into 2024, the majority of our snowpack starts to fall in the February timeline and is put on through March and April. There was a lot of concern because it remained dry across the irrigated region in the fall and into winter. And so we started to prepare for options in the event of a water supply shortage due to reduced snowpack. In February 2024, key water license holders from across the basin came together and started discussing options. They were supported by computer water supply modeling exercises, and we had a lot of discussions on what we could do, what we should do. And in April, key water license holders, including all of our irrigation districts, agreed to water sharing memorandums of understanding that really everyone agreed to take less water so that everyone in the basin would have some water in the event of a water supply shortage. What's very interesting about those conversations is that there were no lawyers in the room at all. Rather, the key participants really relied on the knowledge and experience of their operational staff and their knowledge of the watershed and what they could do and what they could put in place in terms of restrictions. So at the end of the day, our irrigation districts agreed in the event of a water supply shortage in 2024 to restrict their irrigators to 50% of their normal on-farm allocation. And our key municipalities and industries across the region agreed to reduce their water use by anywhere from 5 to 20%. Those water sharing memorandums of understanding were put in place in some of the sub-basins across the South Saskatchewan River Basin in 2024. And until such time as conditions improved. So we were able to come together and have those really hard discussions and come up with a really unique option. And the reason for that is because of the relationships that had been developed over the last 25 years between all of the users in the basin.
Yeah, go ahead.
A quick add-on to that one. The role, that's a really good point about there were no lawyers in the room. There were actually not a lot of the regulators in the room, except as observers. And that was important too. So what's the role of the regulator and the government? This was to set the rules, set the playing field. And then as long as the participants were operating within that set of rules, within those boundaries, anything went. And that allowed people to come up with really inventive, creative solutions. So set the rules, get out of the way, and let the people who know the watershed best come with the solutions. And that worked. Thank you.
David.
So there were some very good lessons learned in our district in particular, which is you don't cut allocation through the middle of an irrigation season because you're not very popular with your customers. We learned that the hard way. It was never intentional, but it was such a strange season that year where supply looked okay. And then it was extreme heat right out of the beginning, very unusual for that time of year. And so there was heavy irrigating right in early May into mid-May, and then it never really stopped. And then we really saw warning signs that we were going to have a supply problem Probably could have finished off that year, but we're very worried about what we would have for supply going into 2024. And we made some tough decisions to try to, I guess, curb that appetite for water and cut some of the allocation. And yeah, it was a good lesson to learn, a difficult one that we said we will now take a more conservative approach as we set allocation going into a season. The other thing I want to talk about is on the other side. One of the reasons why irrigation is so prevalent in southern Alberta is because it's semi-arid. It's very dry here in the Lethbridge to Medicine Hat region. I would say average annual precipitation is only 13 inches a year. It's not a lot. And so irrigation kind of was born out of necessity. If you wanted to grow crops, you needed a way to be able to water them, to be able to have sustainable irrigation or agriculture. And so through some great foresight and entrepreneurship and support of the Canadian federal government at that time, some of the original canal infrastructure was started or constructed, starting at the U.S. border, making its way to Lethbridge, and that was end of the 1800s, early 1900s. We've seen that system build out. We've got, as I said, now a very robust irrigation district, and there's other ones in our region as well, but we're irrigating over 520,000 acres. And sometimes we have the opposite happen, where we have too much rainfall. It doesn't always happen, but it happens. And so we started having some flooding events, overland flooding events, probably 2011, there was a bad one. Then we had some more in 2015, 2018. And so municipalities and producers in the area said, we need to figure out a way to be able to combat that a bit more and utilize some of the infrastructure we have. I've got some maps. I don't know if they can show them from the presenter's point of view, but our main canal stretches 312 kilometers, about 260-ish miles from tip to tail. And we wanted to figure out ways where we could utilize it to sometimes take overland flooding to direct it away from land masses, and then also for municipalities. And also just reduce the impact when we have flooding events. And so a study was commissioned, it was helped. About 7 projects were identified. And there's a map of our whole district just to get you a rough geographic where we are. And if we flip through some of the other ones, you'll see it. That's a little bit more of a blown up. And in the Tabor region, which is just above where we show Chin Reservoir, we decided to work on a project called, the first one that was identified in this flood mitigation and stormwater initiative was the Horsefly Emergency Spillway. And basically, we worked along with a bunch of the other municipalities in the region, starting right from the city of Lethbridge all the way to city of Medicine Hat. So a bunch of, I guess, counties or municipals have done it. Towns have put in capital into it, and then they were able to leverage federal and provincial money to start building some of this storm infrastructure. And very thankful to the municipal district of Tabor, who spearheaded this original project, applied for all the grant funding. And we've been very successful in building now a $40–50 million plus project that has enhanced the ability to maintain the integrity of our main canal, but quickly, which is there shown on the red line, you can see, and quickly take it off, some of the pressure off the main canal, and take it to the Old Man River in the case of severe flooding. And it's proven to be a fantastic, even surprising to me, collaborative effort where a lot of the various different municipalities said we were willing to. We recognize how important it is to everybody in this basin, from a geographical, from a safety, from a economic impact in the case of flooding. And we were able to find funding from all the different partners to leverage bigger federal and provincial funding to actually make this first project go.
Thank you. Sure, go for it.
Question for the irrigator people. In 24, was that the year when they did the whole basin, including Montana, discussions with everybody? What year was that? Because that's, to me, one of the primary examples of growth between the irrigators. There used to be a lot of conflict in this region. And then there was that one year where they kind of got together and figured out what was going on and made some adjustments sort of themselves. Was that the year? I don't know.
Are you referring to the IJC meeting? that was held? No, just
Mon-
where we,
Montana irrigators let the Milk River irrigators
oh,
take some of their allotment because they weren't going to use it.
that could be. We don't represent irrigators in the Milk because there's no actual irrigation district there. They're just private irrigators.
But I believe
But
it
it-
was
it
in
was.
response to that drought, that spring of 24.
So the point is, everybody understands how the system works. Everybody knows what the limitations are and the challenges we face. And together they're trying to find a path forward.
So in connection with that, both Lance and Len highlighted the age of some of these water agreements that everyone is operating under. So Lance, would you maybe touch on in a little more detail how both the agreements and the infrastructure themselves are responding to what changes we're seeing as it relates to ag and economic and environmental concerns? How well are these agreements aging? What's the context for improvements to infrastructure? What are the things we could be looking at?
So two agreements that impact this issue. One is the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty between the U.S. and Canada. And that one, I think, is aging very well. There's enough flexibility in that treaty that allowed us to move from just looking at irrigation, navigation, water supply, and hydropower to include water quality and now watershed approaches. So the challenge for two countries and looking at watersheds with an independent group like us, where we have no authority other than what governments ask us to do, we become a reporting mechanism in some areas. So we can help the governments be aware of and alerted to problems before they get to be a crisis, if you will. So there's the flexibility in the treaty that allows for that, means we can continue to do that in areas all across the transboundary. In relation to the St. Mary Milk, that's a 1921 order. And there was a lot of conflict at that point. And in fact, the conflict from that area that was developing was one of the things that drove interest in doing the treaty in the first place. I think that treaty has always had a challenge with apportionment issues. What's fair? Not everybody's always agreed with that. The recent study evolved partly because there was interest in looking at that again, but it was driven not by politics, but by the realities of what was going on with the earlier snow melt, the challenges of weather and the hotter and the drier periods, and then the excessive water when we weren't expecting it. So it's being driven, I think, more by natural causes, but that's helping us shape how that agreement, that order might be tweaked, but if governments agree, but it's still allowing for irrigation to happen. And in the Milk River system, which we haven't talked much about, there's an increased interest in Alberta in that area, but that's where the biggest challenges occur. And then in the tail end in Montana, they kind of have their own formula for how the water gets there and what their fair share is. So as they look at administrative rules, they're reviewing all that and to see if there's anything in the administrative procedures that would allow that to work better. And then we'll expect recommendations on that. And then there's the infrastructure issue. But it's amazing how well they've worked over these years.
They may have known a thing or two not too long ago. So in terms of all of these changes that are happening, one of the things that comes up is making investments in water infrastructure. Kim, can you speak to that issue on the Canadian side, and what are the most urgent needs as it relates to improving reliability and sustainability for Canadian water infrastructure?
Sure, and I think we have a slide that we submitted to look at the Saskatchewan River Basin roadmap. So if we could bring that one up, I think that would be helpful. So what we've done over the last 20 plus years is look for a way to be able to make sure we have solid science and solid modeling tools that everyone can believe in. So that's the one thing that this isn't the right one. That's the SSRB one. So the things that we really need for good collaborative watershed management, you have to have a really strong set of data and tools that's easily understandable by humans. There are a lot of modeling tools out there that are incomprehensible. This has to be something that everyone can understand and believe in. The second absolutely critical thing is you have to have the participation of those folks that know the watershed best. And that's what we've been able to have engaged in these processes, the irrigators, the municipalities, the environmental groups, anyone that watershed management groups, anyone that touches the water, they have a good understanding of that. Water's local and water is very personal. And so it's really important to make sure that you have the people that are local and that have that strong personal connection to the water. They're the ones that can participate in these conversations and make these hard trade-offs because they know what they're trading off with their neighbor. And then the next thing that's really important is to make sure that we have a regulatory framework, a policy framework that allows us to be, what the rules are clear, and that allows people to know what the rules are. I mean, that's what I was saying before, how important that is to make sure the government's role is to put the board, set the rules and identify the hockey analogy. They're the referee and they put the boards in place. And then after that, let the teams play, let people play. And so that's the other very, very important part of this. So over the last 20 years, we've been able to bring together these groups of people, build these tools, these trust-based tools, and make sure that the regulators were there as well, and to make sure that the regulatory framework was clear. And this tool that we sent it to the group. In the end here, this project, which was funded and coordinated by AIDA, brought together everyone in the Southern Basin. And we were able to put together this roadmap in terms of what are the critical pieces, what are the things we really need to do to manage between now and over the next 100 years to make sure that we can still live here in Southern Alberta, that we can still live and work here and produce food here. And we identified very many activities, many of which up in the upper left-hand corner there is already in progress. There are short-term actions, which are less than 2 years to implement, up to 10 years, and then over 20 years. So in terms of critical kind of infrastructure, and that's the lower right-hand corner there, what we really need when all is said and done is what we really need is some key infrastructure, and that would be more storage that will allow us to be able to hold the water. So what we're seeing, and Margo mentioned it as well, and I think Lance did as well. What we're seeing is that the climate is changing, and we can all debate forever about what's causing the climate to change, but it is changing. And what we are seeing over the next few years or the next 100 years or so, is we're not expecting to see a big change in the amount of precipitation that's coming down. What we are seeing is a shift that instead of coming down in the form of snow and going on the glaciers and being held, that's where the storage has been traditionally. The snow melt is coming a month earlier, and it's coming in the form of rain, and it's flowing through to Saskatchewan. No offense to our Saskatchewan friends, but we'd like to keep our 50% of the water on our side of the border and to be able to use that. And for that, we need to hold that water, and we need more storage. So there's some boxes here, the big orange ones. The orange ones are where we believe there needs to be more storage. The most critical one in my mind is the one on the upper bow that gives us flood and drought protection. It's the rebuilding of the Ghost Reservoir. There's one farther down on the bow, Airmore, that allows us to be able to better manage and help support the southern system, which has already got a lot of storage on it. There's one there on the belly. The belly has no storage at all, and they run out of water like mid-August traditionally. And there's one up in the Red Deer area, the Ardley project. So we've identified these. We've put them forward to the government. And I don't mean to be so brash about it, but for about $15 billion, you can put all of this stuff in place. And we have all of these actions, and we basically have stable, more or less the ability to react and to changes in conditions pretty stably for the next few generations. And that was a piece of good news to a lot of people in the room, that we have an opportunity to be able to do something about the situation and not just react to it like happened in 2023. Sort of long-winded, but we're very excited about this and happy to talk more about it. And you can go on the QR code and read all about it. And we've also done this in the North Saskatchewan as well, as in the North. So it's a good process.
Kim's comments have just illustrated how multi-layered and complicated all of this is, and that it's not any one thing that becomes the solution. And so, Lance, with that in mind, what do you see needing to happen as it relates to water infrastructure investments on the U.S. side of the border?
There's a couple things. One thing that sticks out in my mind all across the transboundary that was hinted at here is, how do we use data and share data and use that data to build models, because the rivers start on one side and go across the other side. And if we don't have consistency in that, it's really hard to analyze how the watershed's going to function. In my previous job way back, we tried to model the Red River going to Winnipeg because it flows north from where I live in North Dakota, and we couldn't do it because the roads didn't match up, the rivers didn't match up, the data from what years we were using didn't match up. So IJC did a data harmonization project across the entire transboundary, and we're currently updating that to get the new information. And I don't know if you noticed on the slides I used, there were little gray shaded boxes on the watersheds. That's First Nation territory. That's new to the map. So models aren't going to work if we don't have good data. Good data is not going to help us across the transboundary if we're not using the same metrics, the same information sources. So I know, because of what we're doing, USGS and ECCC are working hard to use the same language in how they do models. So little by little, we're building that. So that's, I think, important even in this area, especially if you're going to model the flows coming off a glacier, going up where you guys have your infrastructure and your improvements. We need to know what that's going to look like and be able to plan accordingly. Infrastructure, infrastructure itself, I mentioned the canal from the US side. Anything you do in the canal that increases flow helps. But lately they've been spending money on repairing the canal because it's broken down twice in the last 5 years. So moving the water from point A to point B and then figuring out where to store it, because nobody has adequate storage yet. Those are the big infrastructure challenges.
Anyone else have anything to add related to infrastructure? Equal opportunity panel here. Well, good, because Len, I got a question for you. In your presentation, you highlighted how technology had made it possible for the Blood Tribe to be able to manage all of those pivots across all of those acres. Could you speak to how this modernization ability has made it so that you have both increased productivity, efficiency, and just what it's contributed to the overall economic growth because of the access to the new tech as it relates to water?
Yes, Alberta, we've talked about how important irrigation is, and farmers everywhere in southern Alberta are quick to adopt new technology. I mentioned there how they use a SCADA system for their water distribution system. One thing that is unique with BTAP that I don't think exists in any irrigation district in Alberta. None of the water leaves BTAC. The main canal that flows north at the north end is a dead level canal, and through the SCADA system, they're able to operate it and not have any return flow to the rivers. As far as the center pivots themselves are concerned, in the first days, we were using the best technology, low impact sprinklers on top. As new technology came, spray nozzles, drop tubes, we've converted all of those center pivots to the best technology of the time. And by doing that, it's the old more crop per drop. As we mentioned on 2 occasions, the blood tribe was willing to share water, and with the water they're allocated, the more efficient they can be, the more able they are to share water.
Margo, David, do you have anything you'd like to add with regards to that?
Well, yeah. So we are in the midst of, and there's about, I guess, 9 of us left, irrigation districts. So not everyone that is irrigation district in Alberta, but about 9 of us embarked on a modernization program that was spurred by economic development, basically. During COVID, it was recognized that there was very large concern by the Alberta government for lack of productivity. GDP was grinding to a halt, and they were looking for projects that would put people to work in the short term, but had long tail economic benefit. And so through some great discussions and collaborations, we ended up coming up with a deal which turned into the Alberta Irrigation Modernization Program, where the irrigation districts, Margo called us quickly to summon, and we had what was called shovel-ready or near shovel-ready projects that were always on our drawing boards. We just said we could bring these forward really, really quickly to help with rehab existing infrastructure, but also look at some additional new infrastructure. And that's almost $1 billion program in 2020 dollars. I want to clarify that it's costing a little bit more in today's dollars, but that's what we signed up for. But it was a great collaborative effort between the provincial government, who organized it and gave some grant funding, 30%. And then we were able to borrow 50% federal dollars for a very long-term low-interest loan, and then the districts came up with the other 20%. And so for the majority of us, we are doing what we've been doing for many years, which is converting open conveyance or canal type of water conveyance to underground pipelines in a very accelerated fashion. We've been doing that for about 40 years. We're just doing it on steroids right now in the last 6 or 7 years. And that's allowing us to save a lot of water due to the fact that you don't have evaporation, you don't have seepage, and unlike the blood tribe, we all have tail out or spill at the end of an open conveyance system that ends up in a river, that ends up in Saskatchewan, which is good for Saskatchewan, but bad for Alberta and bad for our irrigators. So when it's an enclosed pipeline, it basically sits there until it's called upon to be used later in the season. And so a lot of the irrigation districts are working toward these projects. We've definitely completed the majority of them. And in addition to the pipelines, there's 3 of us who are looking at exactly what we talked about, more storage. So 2 of us are expanding existing reservoir storage, and 1 is building a brand new, smaller reservoir. Even though we are all doing this modernization to be with the eyesight of being able to expand, we are definitely being able to irrigate more acres. We are all using less water than we were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that all has to do with the efficiencies of underground pipelines, but also what Len talked about, what the blood tribe did. All producers have moved towards low pressure, drop tube, very smart artificial intelligence pivots, which is a big capital cost at the producer level, but saves a lot of water. And so we are definitely irrigating more land with less water than we used to. If you think about that natural progression of 40, 50 years ago of flood irrigating to wheel moves to high pressure pivots to low pressure pivots, we're at a stage now, the low pressure pivot is like 92, 93% efficient. I don't know how much more efficient they're going to be able to get with just actual climatic changes and sunshine and wind and things like that. But it's a very efficient way to water crops, and they're very productive, and they grow healthy crops.
I'd just add that the reason it's so important for irrigation districts to create that water efficiency is because the subbasins that our districts operate in are closed basins. And what that means is that the government of Alberta will no longer issue new water license allocations for any other uses. So districts saving water through modernization projects and the on-farm changes that are put in place by irrigators allow the ability to reallocate the already licensed water. And so that can be done a couple of ways through an open market by permanently transferring water volume allocation from one licensed user to another, or the districts, because they do have large allocation volumes on their licenses, they can legally provide water under agreement for other purposes outside of irrigated agriculture. So every time that a district creates those water efficiency gains, there's more opportunity in our basin for additional economic growth and population growth through the trading of license volume or through water through agreements.
Let's go, Kim, and then we'll come back here to Lynn.
Yeah, and that brings to a really important point, because that water license transfer system, we are also seeing a tremendous amount of municipal growth. I think they want to put something like 2 million more people in southern Alberta, which is, we've done the math, we've looked at the numbers, and eventually we are going to not be able to accommodate putting 2 to 3 million more people in southern Alberta and keep producing the food for the world. And that's really the existential pressure trade-off, and it's going to come, and it's going to come somewhere in about between 2100 and 2130, and nobody wants to talk about that. And but that's why just really understanding how the system works, and I appreciate it's so complicated, but understanding how the system works, the politicians really need to educate themselves really well on this, or otherwise, our nice, we all get along and love each other approach to water management, which worked so far, is going to start to get really tense. And the other thing is, when they're doing these water transfers now, the number of data center projects that we're working on right now in southern Alberta is telling. And what's the best and highest use of that water? Is it for a data center? Is it for a mall? Is it for another 600,000 people to live in East Calgary? Or is it to make more food for the world? And these are the serious trade-offs, and everyone needs to be educated on it, and aware that you just don't turn on your tap and the water comes out. And it's frightening how many people still think that.
Yeah.
That's my spiel.
Lynn.
Soapbox.
Yeah, if I could just take off my BTAP hat for a minute. In recent years, the most of the work that I've done has been water licensing in Alberta, transfers, amalgamations, amendments. One thing, and there's a good graph, if you look at Alberta, and these numbers aren't exact, but it's something like 20% of the water in Alberta is in southern Alberta and 90% of the people. Alberta has an abundance of water, but most of it flows north to the Arctic Ocean. So transfers are an important tool, as Margo mentioned, because you can't get a new license. The other thing, I was assisted some districts to amend their water licenses, as Margo mentions, so they can use water for other purposes. The program, I just want to remind people, the program that they talked about, the Alberta Irrigation Modernization Program, is a phenomenal program. And I know people from outside Alberta have looked at it. And I just want to emphasize again, because sometimes they don't realize, when you look at the quick press releases, they talk about 20% district, 30% Alberta, 50% Canada. But that 50% is a very advantageous loan But what that means, and one reason why irrigation has expanded so much in Alberta is the attitude of irrigators. When the dust settles, 70% of those costs will be paid by the actual people who do the irrigating.
So that actually raises a follow-up question that ties into these last two. You've all kind of touched on the edges around the financing and the cost. I heard Kim mentioned 15 billion. I heard grants. I heard low interest loans. This all costs a lot of money. What is the appetite of water users and government around funding these projects and their willingness to acknowledge that the price tag that comes with them, this is not pennies. This is millions, possibly hundreds of millions over the long term. What are those conversations looking like in your groups? What are they prepared to do? Because you can only do so much on an annual water assessment.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we've been very fortunate in Alberta that for over 50 years, the government of Alberta has provided a grant to our irrigation districts through what's called the Irrigation Rehabilitation Program. So it is a separate program and it is a cost share program. Part of the reason that government continues to provide a contribution to that program year after year is because of the return on investment that they get. So we know that for every dollar that they invest in irrigation infrastructure rehabilitation or modernization, it returns $3.56 to the provincial economy. So we've been fortunate that we have been able to demonstrate that return on investment to government over the years, and they continue to be supportive because they can see the direct impacts, the indirect impacts, and the induced impacts. And David, maybe you want to talk about the Premier Agri-Food Corridor and how that ties in.
Yeah. So obviously with that eye of when they came to us to try to get things kickstarted out of COVID, it was for a long tail vision of irrigation expansion, which would lead to agricultural expansion. And particularly in our region, and particularly between Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, we had already had a good track record of attracting a lot of value-added processing because we grow a lot of high-value crops. And so it's close to market, reliable production could lead to capacity plant throughput, which obviously was very good and attractive to those producing companies. And so they recognized that if we could increase our agriculture and particularly irrigated agriculture footprint, more value-added investment would become, and we're starting to see that. One of the things I can say, because it's right in our district, is once the AIM program was announced, and then we announced that we were going to expand Chin Reservoir, McCain Foods doubled down and expanded by 100% their processing facility in Chin, which is a potato processing facility that ships potatoes, processed potatoes, frozen to all parts of the world, Asia, United States, within Canada. I think they do all the McDonald's French fries within Canada. But it was because they knew we were on this path of expansion. And I believe they were looking at another location site, but that was what tipped the favor for them to want to expand in that area. And we're getting other interests. So a colleague in our room, Mr. Lewington, and his great team branded the very apt name that that area between Lethbridge and Medicine Hat is branded as Canada's premier agri-food corridor. So if you want to be in the agri-food business, if you want to be in the value-added processing business, this is where you want to be, is that area of Southern Alberta, because we have good sunshine, good soil, water availability, progressive farmers, and good trade routes to be able to get your product to market.
Before you go, I'd like to invite Representative Mary Dye and Senator Mike Cuffe to come and join us on the stage. They're going to help us wrap up here shortly. So Kim, go ahead. Very quickly,
Going more from the how do you get folks to want to do the investment? A good flood helps. As in 2013, the amazing, the damage that was done in the city of Calgary, all of a sudden, there was lots of money available to start to build flood infrastructure, including one on the Elbow River, which is the river I live on, $850 million. And it's simply there. It's simply there to catch some water coming down the Elbow River if we get a little bit too much of it. So, and the rebuild of the Ghost, that's primarily driven by flood protection for the city of Calgary, because guess where you get elected? If you are in Alberta, you get elected by electing your party in the city of Calgary. And that's where that money is coming from. So it's pretty interesting. The drought stuff goes and goes and goes, and it's okay. Man, one big flood, and there's a lot of interest and a lot of money available, unfortunately.
It's amazing how quickly people who, like you said, I think, just assume that when the tap turns on, the water comes out, get really interested when they're standing in multiple, what is it? It's not inches up here. What is it up here? Kilometers? Meters? Okay. See, I'll get the lingo eventually. Len, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I just going again, taking off my. There we go. Sorry. Taking off my deep tap hat for a minute. For 12 years, when I worked for Alberta Agriculture, I administered the irrigation rehab program that Margo referred to. And we had a new assistant deputy minister come in who had come over from transportation. So we, of course, gave him a tour of southern Alberta, and we were talking about the IRP, and he had a look, and I always remember this. He says, well, we've got a long-range program to help municipalities and that keep their roads and water in good shape. Why wouldn't we do the same thing for irrigation districts? This is Alberta's water highway. And I mean, the funding varies, goes up and down. But the districts know there's at least a regular fund there that they can access to keep their infrastructure in reasonable shape.
So now that we've heard from our practical on the boot, on the ground, they're the ones that are dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, we thought we would close with the perspective of a policymaker. Both Representative Dye and Senator Cuffe have worked extensively on the southern side of the border on water-related issues, and we're going to turn to them now for what they would like to put forward as maybe either potential areas of opportunity for us to move forward, or what they feel like their takeaways are from today's discussion that we can now go to work and maybe implement to be proactive. So Senator Cuffe.
Sure. If I might start, the St. Mary's Milk River occupied a pretty big, important part of time in the 2023 legislative session in Montana. And the senator representing that area came to me, wanted some grants through the committee that I chaired. We wound up making, he was asking $52 million emergency grants because of the St. Mary's Milk washout. And eventually, through negotiations with the governor's office, it was broken down to two $26 million packages that would be loans. And on one of the loans, they would pay interest only, and the interest would go into a holding fund for future maintenance programs, which we thought made sense. Angered the senator was not very happy who brought it. I was a friend of mine. I defended our proposals, but the big arguments are, in part to something that was just said, that somebody's making money off the irrigation, and the federal government built it, provided it. It's not the responsibility of state government to come in and take care of repairs of wear and tear over 115 years. And it was quite a battle between fiscal conservatives and ag folks, and I was right in the middle. It's my committee. So that's how it wound up doing. And the big one probably was the $26 million loan, repay interest only and repay it essentially to yourselves into a savings account. I don't believe it was ever tapped, but the program's very important and very complicated, as it's been said. So that's all I want to say about that. And not much has been said about the Kootenai Koocanusa, Columbia River. Be happy to add a little bit about that, but we'll give Mary Di a shot here. Representative.
Thank you, Senator.
Real quick, Mike, did federal government do anything with the state money matching wise?
Say it again.
Did federal government contribute anything to those repairs that Montana put the money into? Did you get federal money as well?
Did we get what money?
Federal?
Well, I think the federal money came, and I don't remember what, there were several different packages. I know Congressman Sinke had I think $100 million package. That may be the one that went. He was on appropriations. There had been another package proposed by one of the others. But yeah, there was a lot of federal money came into it, and I don't think they needed to tap and they were reluctant to tap the 26 million.
Go ahead, Mary.
That was really interesting. Thank you, Senator. If you could bring up my slide. Oh, thank you. There it is. In response to what I've heard today, I would like to say, first of all, that I'm going to relate it to our experience on the Columbia Basin Project and on the Columbia River. What you were showing in that cross-border collaboration with the International Joint Committee, it's and your schematic, your how you laid out the committee. You showed a network, and it was a complex network, and you brought into the table every entity that had a stake in the case. And I think that that's an important thing. But what I heard also is that the work that you're doing is to break down the silos in that network and create it as a system. And a watershed is a system, and you have to manage it through systems of collaboration where the needs are all met at a higher level. And so I appreciate that we have a complex network of collaborating people, and we have people on the ground that are running the irrigation districts that are now working collaboratively in a systems approach so that nobody gets completely locked out for someone else to get all the benefit. And I think in water, that has been the source of the fight in generations past. And now we're looking at a totally new way of approaching water stewardship. And I think it's what I heard was very heartening. From you, Len, I think we have a lot of collaboration, or we have a lot of commonality, common ground, because one of the big breakthroughs on our project with Columbia Basin Project was dinner over a pork chop with Roylene Comes at Night, who is the head of our National Resource Conservation NRCS service, that she's the state director and is highly regarded nationally. Blackfoot from Montana, married to a tribal leader in Montana. And that relationship has been profound and helpful for all of us. The other commonality, or that without her, I don't think we would be where we're at, because she comes from a systems and collaboration approach. But the other piece of it is that what you'd mentioned about, I lost my train of thought there, thinking about Rolene. I hate that when that happens. But anyway, so moving on, I think that there's a lot of common ground in the way you approached your project. Oh, I remember the 1877 treaty. The Colvilles also have an 1877 water right on the Columbia River for irrigating north of the river. And that's never been approached, but they want to. And I think by the new systems that we're building now, that should be absolutely on the table and moving forward. And when we saw that the Inaba farm sold back to the Yakima Nation, and we saw Inabas teach and mentor and train a group of people who didn't believe that they were agrarian in nature, but they are. because they're rooted to the land and they understand the land ethic deeply through time and immemorial. That collaboration is meaningful. And they have been, I've never seen a more joyful group of people 2 years into farming. And they're building food boxes for the Colville Nation. And they've been a tremendous inspiration to me. They have the heart for it. So I just wanted to give you just a really brief update on how far along we are on our project. Our project is a project that was started at the beginning of the Grand Coulee Dam construction. Irrigation infrastructure was constructed on 670,000 acres on the first half of the project, and then it was suspended in 1968 due to funding and political difficulties. So that's how we are. What we've done since then, can't believe you did that. What we've done since then is that we have, in the last 10 or 11 years, broken through to begin new construction, because when the project was suspended, the irrigators were put on deep well irrigation. Those wells are now 2,000 feet deep. And so we have been able to move funding both from the state at about $230 million and from federal about $40 million. And we're in the process of constructing surface water delivery systems to replace the deep wells. Now we're looking at really what is the true need. This is a partial solution to the problem, and we really need to build the whole project. The full additional construction would be 670,000 acres. 570,000 of that would be new acres. But initially, to get full deep well replacement, we need a high canal. The high canal was initially started with a 2-siphon system, and it delivers water to the main canal and the low canal currently. That high canal will make a whole big difference for access to real water availability to lands. It solves a lot of problems. So we got a bill, an amendment in the Farm Bill last week. We're in DC talking about keeping that Farm Bill in the Senate, Farm Bill amendment in the Senate, and that completely transforms the way we do water on that hike on this project. And then the federal, it combines 2 federal agencies, Department of Interior and USDA, that they can share each other's permitting, which expedites construction, and that they can share each other's funding, because the Interior is a repayment contract only kind of funding source. USDA provides a solid, durable conservation dollars to do really quality work that includes conservation and habitat. So we have federal agencies aligned, and we have a lot of momentum in the Senate. Next slide, please. Just briefly, this is photos from our trip last week, and you see that we're holding the map of the project. We met with our new secretary under the Bureau of Reclamation, Aubrey Betancourt. She's phenomenal. She just moved over from NRCS at USDA. She was previously the Farm Service Agency State Director for California. She's a farmer's wife. Her husband and her grow almonds. I think she's on the almond side of the almond growers. I can't remember. I can't keep those guys straight. But anyway, we met at the USDA. They also are supporting us wholly and entirely, and we've made significant changes in the statutes at USDA as well to get this project going forward. And then the last group is just working with our new Congressman Baumgardner, who wrote the amendment and carried it at 2 a.m. and where we were here celebrating in our living rooms over C-SPAN. And that was great. Final slide, please. So this is a closer picture of the map, and it shows the amount of collaboration that we have achieved over the 10 years. All those signatures are people that we have met with and built relationships over time to build the momentum and the statutory framework to be able to move forward and build a big project. Let me leave you with 3 ideas. I have this paragraph for you, and I think that it really lines with everything that was said on the panel today. And I just want to flesh this idea out, because this is the driving philosophy that has allowed us to go from completely blocked to unlocking the watershed for the benefit of all of the river dependent people living on this watershed in Eastern Washington. The first idea is that a conflict verbalized precisely is an opportunity. Most water fights in this basin are not between good people and bad people, but they're between people who have never been asked to say plainly what they actually need, how much, when, and why. Precision turns a standoff into a problem with dimensions, and the problems with dimensions can be engineered. That's why hearing the irrigation district manager talk about, right, how you managed to navigate a drought situation, iterated learning, and then found a better path. That heartens me. Thank you for doing that. Nothing's scarier than to be in August and have your water turned off. And I'm a dryland farmer, by the way. Resolution, protecting only one need, is no resolution. And we have proof in the ground beneath us. Farms that couldn't get surface water drilled instead, some as deep as 2,000 feet. The water was tainted with salt and calcium and fluoride and you name it, and it didn't produce good crops. That drawdown didn't stay under the farm. It came for the aquifer that the towns and cities drink from. The obvious fix was to put those acres back on the river and let the aquifer recover. And that was blocked by a general concern over offstream diversions. So the wells kept pumping and now they're being decommissioned with no surface delivery standing behind them. 3 legitimate needs, 1 shared shortage, not because anyone actually acted badly, but because we ranked needs in a line instead of managing the river as a system. And there is coherence beneath the surface of what looks irreconcilable. Water surface delivered where wells are failing is the same act as groundwater relief. 1 canal, several needs met at once. Manage the network, and every node can be met. Rank the nodes and you shrink the whole thing. That is the case, and that is the only case. When river-dependent communities steward their watersheds together, we gain more liberty and more prosperity than any of us can win alone. Norman MacLean gave us the better version of that sentence. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. Thank you for letting me participate.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have been well served today and have been reminded that rivers know no boundaries, regardless of what we may draw on a map. So please join me in thanking our presenters for sharing their knowledge with us.